A nurse was called to take care of a boy in a delicious condition. One day, when nobody was looking, she approached him and was amazed at what she saw. The air was thick with the stench of decay as Sarah Thompson stirred, her consciousness slowly pulling her from the depths of unconsciousness. She blinked against the harsh light filtering through the tangled mess of garbage around her, taking in her surroundings, a chaotic sprawl of discarded refuse, all manner of debris piled high, creating an oppressive fortress of filth that smelled like despair. Panic surged within her as she tried to move, her body heavy and aching, a chilling exhaustion enveloping her like a shroud. What happened? She whispered hoarsely, her throat dry and her voice barely audible. Her mind raced, struggling to piece together fragmented memories. A confrontation with Mark, her husband, began to take shape in her mind, but the details were murky, like shadows dancing just beyond her grasp. Images of anger, betrayal, and a desperate plea for understanding flitted through her thoughts, but they were interrupted by a sharp pain in her side. She forced herself to sit up, wincing as she brushed aside a tattered piece of fabric that clung to her arm. The world around her was a jumble of discarded dreams and broken promises. It was a grim reminder of a life that felt like it had been ripped away without warning. The last thing she remembered was Mark's voice, raised in anger, words she couldn't quite recall, but that left her feeling hollow. As she steadied her breath, Sarah noticed a flicker of movement nearby. She turned her head slowly, her heart racing. The noise of shuffling feet and low voices broke the heavy silence. Straining to listen, she caught snippets of a conversation that sent a chill down her spine. With a surge of instinct, she crouched behind a large mound of refuse, her heart pounding in her chest, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Mark, are you sure she's really gone?" A woman's voice, smooth and sultry, cut through the stench of the dump. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as recognition washed over her. Jessica Reynolds, Mark's mistress. A wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm her, but she pressed herself closer to the debris, desperate to hear more. "Of course, Jess," Mark replied, his tone dismissive, almost bored. "You saw the news report. They think she's dead. It's perfect. No one will question anything we do now." His voice dripped with a chilling ease that made Sarah's skin crawl. "How long do you think we have before anyone starts looking for her?" Jessica asked, a hint of excitement threading through her voice. "I mean, we could really start planning our future together." "Relax, I took care of everything. That money will be ours soon enough," Mark assured her. "Once the funeral's over and the will is read, it'll all be ours. We can finally be together without any baggage." Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as the weight of his words sank in. Her inheritance, the life she had built with Mark, was a trap laid for her by the man who had sworn to love her. Fury ignited within her, hotter than the sun, as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was a pawn in their twisted game, and they believed her to be dead, but she was alive, and she would not be a victim. "Mark, do you really think we can get away with this?" Jessica's voice quivered slightly, a flicker of doubt creeping into her words. "What if someone finds out?" "They won't. I've got it all figured out," he replied confidently. "We'll take the money and disappear. No one will suspect a thing. Just think about it. A new life, just the two of us." Sarah's heart raced as she fought to contain her emotion. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. She had trusted Mark, loved him blindly, and now listening to him casually plot her demise, she felt a surge of resolve. They thought she was gone, but she would rise from the ashes like a phoenix, stronger and more determined than ever. "I need to gather my strength," she thought, her mind racing as she formulated a plan. First, she had to remain hidden, to bide her time and understand their intentions fully. They would pay for their treachery, and she would ensure it. As Mark and Jessica continued their conversation, Sarah focused on the sounds around her. The distant calls of seagulls echoed through the dump, a stark contrast to the dark scheme unfolding nearby. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the anger and pain before she pushed it aside, channeling it into determination. After what felt like an eternity, the couple's voices began to fade as they moved away, laughter trailing behind them. Sarah waited until the sounds of their footsteps had disappeared before she dared to emerge from her makeshift hiding spot. The sunlight was blinding, illuminating the chaotic landscape of refuse that surrounded her. She squinted, shielding her eyes with her hand, realizing that she needed to find a way out of this hellish place. With unsteady legs, Sarah began to navigate the maze of garbage, each step filled with uncertainty. She stumbled over broken glass and discarded items, her heart still racing from the revelation she had just overheard. The weight of her situation pressed heavily on her shoulders, but the fire of vengeance burned brighter within her. Mark thinks he can get away with this, she murmured to herself, determination coating her words, but he has no idea who he's dealing with. As she continued to tread carefully through the filth, Sarah's mind raced with thoughts of what she would do next. She needed evidence, something to expose their betrayal. The idea of confronting them without a plan was reckless, and she had never been one to act impulsively. No, she would gather her strength, learn their next moves, and strike when they least expected it. Finding a sheltered spot among the debris, Sarah paused to catch her breath. Her heart still pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She closed her eyes and pictured Mark's face, his smug smile, the way he had held her close while whispering sweet nothings, all the while plotting her demise. Anguish twisted in her gut, but it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. "I will not let them win," she vowed silently, her fists clenching at her sides. "I will find a way to fight back." With renewed determination, Sarah pushed herself to her feet, scanning the area for anything that might assist her in her quest for revenge. She had to survive long enough to expose the truth. She had to turn the tables on the very people who thought they had won. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garbage dump, Sarah took a deep breath and set off into the murky unknown, her heart a battleground of fear and vengeance. Each step was a promise to herself that she would not only survive, but thrive even in the depths of betrayal. She was alive, and she would fight for her life and her legacy, no matter the cost. Sarah took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the putrid air of the garbage dump. The stench was overwhelming, but it was a small price to pay for the chance to turn her situation around. She had to keep moving, to find something, anything that could aid her in her quest for revenge. As she stepped carefully over a mound of refuse, her eyes scanned the debris, searching for items that could be of use. Among the discarded remnants of people's lives, she spotted a torn tarp, its colors faded and barely recognizable. Sarah wasted no time. She pulled it over her head, creating a makeshift shelter. It was small but sufficient to shield her from the elements. Inside, she piled together other pieces of debris to create a semblance of comfort. It was a far cry from her warm home, but here, in this desolate place, she felt a flicker of hope igniting within her. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, Sarah closed her eyes and concentrated. She replayed the chilling conversation she had overheard, the betrayal cutting deeper than any physical wound. Mark and Jessica thought they had won, but they didn't know that she was still alive, and she would not let them get away with their treachery. "What do I do?" she muttered to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need a plan." Suddenly, her mind raced with possibilities. She could gather evidence, but how? Mark and Jessica would be on high alert now, thinking they had succeeded in their dark plot. She needed to be careful, stealthy. The thought of confronting them head-on made her stomach churn, but she had to reclaim her life, her dignity. As she rummaged through the debris, she stumbled upon an old backpack, half buried under scraps of metal and plastic. With a surge of excitement, she yanked it free and opened it up. Inside, she found a few items that could be useful: a flashlight, a water bottle, and a pocket knife. "This is perfect," Sarah said to herself, a sly smile creeping onto her lips. She would need the flashlight for navigating the dark, and the knife could serve multiple purposes. She tucked the items into her makeshift shelter, feeling a newfound sense of determination wash over her. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Mark and Jessica sat in a small cafe, oblivious to Sarah's plight. They were celebrating their supposed victory, laughing and toasting with glasses of wine, their faces alight with the thrill of their deception. "Can you believe it?" Mark said, leaning back in his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face. "We actually pulled it off. Sarah's out of the picture, and soon that inheritance will be ours." Jessica giggled, swirling her wine with glee. "I've always dreamed of living in that big house. And with her gone, it's all ours. Just think of the life we can have." Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We need to move quickly. The lawyer will be in touch soon, and once we sign those papers, there's no turning back." Jessica's eyes gleamed with ambition. "I can't wait. No more hiding, no more sneaking around. We'll finally be free to live our lives together." As they reveled in their plans, Sarah sat in her shelter, anger boiling in her veins. The very people she had trusted had turned into monsters, and now they were celebrating her demise. She clenched her fists, the pocket knife digging into her palm, a reminder of the strength she needed to find. I'll show them, she whispered fiercely, her resolve hardening. They will pay for what they've done. Hours passed, and as night fell, Sarah's mind raced with ideas, each one more daring than the last. She needed leverage, something that would force Mark and Jessica to face the consequences of their actions. As she contemplated her next move, she suddenly remembered the old cell phone she had seen poking out from beneath a pile of debris earlier. Could it still work? She thought, her heart racing at the possibilities. With renewed energy, she scoured the area nearby, her flashlight beam dancing across the garbage. Finally, she spotted it, an ancient phone, its screen cracked but still intact. She picked it up, wiping away the grime, and noticed the battery was still in it. What are the odds? She chuckled, her spirits lifting slightly. Finding a nearby power outlet in the wall of an old, dilapidated building, Sarah carefully plugged in the phone, praying it would charge. As she waited for it to power up, she contemplated her next steps. If she could manage to record a message detailing everything she'd overheard, it could serve as undeniable proof of their betrayal. The screen flickered to life, and Sarah's heart raced as she navigated through the menus. It was functional, albeit painfully slow. Finding the voice memo application, she took a deep breath and pressed record. "This is Sarah Thompson," she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "If you're hearing this, I am alive. Mark and Jessica believed they had killed me to claim my inheritance. I overheard their plans, and I will use this recording to expose them." She continued, detailing every chilling word she had heard, the plotting and the laughter, the chilling ease with which they discussed her death as if it were nothing more than a business transaction. As she finished her recording, a sense of empowerment enveloped her. She had evidence now, something solid to hold over their heads. With a newfound sense of purpose, she tucked the phone safely into her pocket, knowing it would be her ticket to justice. But as she sat back in her makeshift shelter, the weight of her situation pressed on her. She was still alone, still trapped in a dump, and her heart ached for the life she once had. The thought of facing Mark and Jessica again filled her with a mix of fear and determination. "I will not be a victim anymore," she vowed silently, her gaze fixed on the stars peeking through the gaps in the debris above. "I will reclaim my life no matter what it takes." With that resolve burning fiercely within her, Sarah began to plan her next move. She needed to gather more evidence, to watch Mark and Jessica closely, and to prepare for the confrontation that would inevitably come. She would turn the tables on them, and when the moment arrived, she would be ready. As the darkness enveloped her, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The night was still, but inside her a storm of determination raged. She would not let their betrayal define her. With each passing moment, she was one step closer to reclaiming her life, her dignity, and ultimately, her revenge. Sarah crouched behind a rusted pile of metal, heart pounding in her chest as she peered through the gaps, her breath shallow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dump, illuminating the faces of Mark and Jessica as they emerged from their car, laughter spilling into the air like a taunt. She could hardly believe that just a few days ago she had been oblivious to the treachery brewing within her own home, oblivious to the man who had sworn to love her and the woman who had entangled herself in their lives with such ease. "Did you see the look on that old lawyer's face when I told him about our plans?" Mark said, his voice dripping with confidence. "He thinks I'm just a grieving husband. Little does he know I've already got the next steps lined up." Jessica leaned against the car, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're sure he's going to help us?" she asked, her brow furrowed with doubt. "I mean, what if he decides to back out? We can't risk it." Mark waved a dismissive hand, his arrogance palpable. "He won't. We've got him right where we want him. The moment he hears I'm ready to sign those papers, he'll jump at the opportunity to grab a slice of that inheritance pie. Besides, once Sarah is officially declared dead, there's no turning back." Sarah's stomach twisted at the mention of her name. The cold realization of betrayal coiled around her heart like a constrictor. They had already begun to lay the groundwork for her demise, and here they were, plotting with glee over her very fate. "Just think of it, Jess," Mark continued, his voice low and conspiratorial. "We'll be free of her. No more pretending to be the perfect couple. No more lies, just us." "Right," Jessica replied, but her voice lacked the conviction it had held moments earlier. "But what if someone finds out? What if she shows up?" Mark scoffed. "She won't. Trust me, I took care of everything. I made sure she wouldn't be a problem for us anymore. Just focus on the future, okay? We'll finally be able to live our lives without looking over our shoulders." As they moved toward the entrance of their house, Sarah's resolve deepened. She had to act, and she had to do it soon. She couldn't let them go through with their plans, nor could she let them believe for a moment that she was defeated. Gathering her breath, she turned away from the scene, feeling the weight of her anger fueling her determination. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the dump as Sarah made her way back to her makeshift shelter. It felt like a lifetime since she had arrived here, yet every moment had sharpened her focus. She rummaged through the remnants of discarded lives, searching for anything that would help her prove her existence and expose the deceit that threatened to consume her. Hours passed as she plotted her next move. She gathered scraps of paper and made notes of everything she'd overheard. The way Mark had manipulated Jessica, planting seeds of doubt in her mind, was a crucial detail. If she could find a way to turn Jessica against him, it might just be her ticket to reclaiming her life. Just then, her old cell phone buzzed to life. The screen flickered, and she quickly pressed the buttons, hoping for a miracle. As the battery charged, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. If she could record any incriminating evidence, it would be her voice against theirs. She just needed to be patient and wait for the right moment. The following day, Sarah positioned herself in a nearby alley, her heart racing as she watched the front of Mark and Jessica's house. She had to be careful. They were likely to be on high alert after their recent discussions. She needed to be invisible, a shadow in the periphery of their lives. She watched as Mark left for work, a casual wave to Jessica, who stood on the porch sipping a cup of coffee. Sarah couldn't help but notice the way Jessica's eyes followed him, a mixture of admiration and uncertainty flickering across her face. It was as if she was in a trance, enchanted by the very man who was orchestrating her downfall. "Mark," Jessica called, her voice laced with hesitation. "You're sure about this? I mean, what if something goes wrong?" Mark turned, a smirk playing on his lips. "Nothing will go wrong, Jess. Just stick to the plan. I've got everything under control. You need to trust me." Sarah clenched her fists, fighting the urge to scream. She wanted to shake Jessica awake from this nightmare to make her see the truth, but she knew she had to be strategic. Pushing her emotions aside, she continued to observe, taking notes on every detail. After Mark left, Sarah saw Jessica slip inside the house. Now was her chance. She stealthily approached the back of the house, listening intently to the muted sounds of Jessica moving about. She could hear the clinking of dishes, the soft hum of a music playlist drifting through the air. With her heart pounding, Sarah made the risky decision to move closer, inching toward an open window. She pressed her ear against the cool glass, straining to catch a snippet of conversation. The words that reached her sent a chill through her veins. "Mark, are you sure this is the right thing?" Jessica's voice trembled with uncertainty. "What if she comes back? What if we get caught?" "Stop worrying, Jess," Mark's voice boomed with a false sense of authority. "She's gone, and we're free. You have to believe that. This is our chance." Sarah felt a surge of anger mixed with sadness. How could he manipulate her so easily? The thought of Jessica standing by, letting herself be deceived, filled her with a deep sense of urgency. She had to find a way to reach her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Sarah returned to her shelter, her mind racing with ideas. She needed a plan, and she needed help. That was when she remembered Officer Jake Daniels, the local police officer she had spoken to briefly during her last encounter with Mark. He seemed decent, maybe even trustworthy. If she could convince him of her situation, he could help her gain the upper hand. That evening, Sarah found a quiet spot behind a dumpster and dialed the number she had saved in her old phone. The phone rang, and her heart raced with anticipation. Finally, a voice answered. "Hello, Jake Daniels speaking?" "Officer Daniels," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "It's Sarah. Sarah Thompson. I need to talk to you. It's about my husband." There was a brief silence, and she could hear the sound of papers rustling on the other end. "Sarah? But I thought you were..." He hesitated, clearly trying to process her words. "I'm alive, Jake, and I need your help. I overheard my husband and his mistress plotting to take my inheritance. I need to expose them before it's too late." Jake's voice turned serious. "Are you safe? Where are you?" I'm at a dump nearby. I can't go home. You have to believe me. They think I'm dead." He paused again. I'll come by. Just stay put and don't do anything reckless." As she ended the call, Sarah felt a mix of hope and anxiety. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Mark and Jessica were growing bolder with their plans, and she needed to act quickly. The darkness of betrayal had wrapped around her life like a suffocating blanket, but she was determined to fight back, to reclaim her existence and expose the lies that had threatened to consume her. With her resolve hardening, Sarah prepared for the confrontation ahead, her mind racing with plans for the evidence she would gather and the truths she would reveal. The game was changing, and she was ready to play. As the sunlight began to filter through the debris above Sarah's makeshift shelter, she knew she had to act. The weight of her situation pressed down on her, a crushing reminder of her betrayal and the precarious plan she was hatching. She had no time to waste. Every moment spent hiding felt like a moment lost to Mark and Jessica's machinations. But now she had a glimmer of hope. Officer Jake Daniels was her only ally, and she needed him to believe her story. Sarah carefully made her way through the maze of garbage, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent countless hours thinking through every possible scenario, but until she was face to face with Jake, it all felt abstract. She had to convince him of her plight to make him understand the gravity of her situation. Tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, she emerged from the shadowy depths of the dump, the stench of refuse clinging to her clothes. When she reached the police station, her heart raced. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, the cool air hitting her face like a breath of fresh hope. The lobby was sparsely populated, a few officers milling about, and a couple of civilians waiting to file reports. Spotting Jake at the front desk, Sarah took a deep breath and approached him, desperation etched across her face. "Officer Daniels," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He looked up, his expression shifting from casual indifference to shock as he registered her presence. "Sarah," he exclaimed, standing up from his chair, I thought you were dead." "I was," she replied, her voice steadying as she met his gaze. "But I'm alive, and I need your help. They think I'm gone." "What are you talking about?" Jake glanced around, ensuring no one was listening. "You need to explain this to me." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Mark and Jessica, they planned my death to steal my inheritance. I overheard them talking about it in the dump. I have proof. I recorded everything." She fished out the old cell phone she had salvaged, her heart racing as she handed it to him. Jake's brows furrowed as he examined the phone. "You expect me to believe this? This sounds insane," he said, flipping through the device. "I know it sounds crazy, but please, you have to listen to me. I have to expose them before they can finalize their plans. You have to believe me." He paused, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. "If this is true and you're not just some woman trying to get attention, then we need to act fast. What do you want to do?" "I need you to help me catch them in the act. They're meeting with a lawyer to finalize everything. If we can record that conversation, we can expose them." Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "This is a lot to take in, but if you're telling the truth, then we can't let them get away with it. I'll help you, but you need to be careful. If they find out you're alive, They won't find out," she interrupted, determination flooding her voice. "I'll do whatever it takes. I just need a chance." "All right," Jake said, his resolve hardening. "Let's figure out the details. We'll need to set up surveillance for this meeting. You know where they'll be?" "Yes, I overheard everything. They're meeting at the law office on Maple Street. I can show you the way." As they made their plans, Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. The pieces were falling into place, and for the first time since she woke up in the dump, she felt a sense of control over her life. Meanwhile, Mark and Jessica were completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. In a cozy cafe not far from the law office, they sat across from each other, their laughter ringing out like music, blissfully ignorant of the consequences of their actions. "Can you believe it?" Mark said, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. "We're finally free. Once we get the inheritance, we can start fresh, just you and me." Jessica twirled her hair, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I can't wait. Just think of all the things we could do. A new house, traveling. It's everything we've talked about." Mark leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And once we have the money, we can make sure Sarah's accident stays buried. No one will suspect a thing." A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she imagined what they were plotting. Their laughter felt like daggers, sharp and invasive, and she had to remind herself that this was the last time they would ever get away with it. Back at the police station, Sarah and Jake finalized their plan. "I'll hide nearby with the recording equipment," Jake explained, his voice low and serious. You'll need to stay out of sight, but we'll need you to drop some hints to lure them into discussing the inheritance. Make them think they're safe." "I can do that," Sarah replied, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'll play it cool. They won't suspect a thing." On the day of the meeting, Sarah's heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. She had dressed in a way that would make her blend in, her hair tucked neatly beneath a baseball cap. She arrived at the law office early, her pulse pounding in her ears as she waited. Jake positioned himself in a nearby alley, keeping a watchful eye on the entrance. He had set up his equipment, ready to capture the moment Sarah's life would change forever. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's anxiety swelled. She had to remember what was at stake. This was not just about revenge, this was about reclaiming her life. Finally, she spotted Mark and Jessica entering the building, their demeanor casual, the very picture of confidence. Taking a deep breath, Sarah steeled herself. She needed to act. She approached the entrance under the pretense of waiting for someone, her heart hammering in her chest as the door swung open. "Mark," she called out, feigning surprise as she stepped forward. "I didn't expect to see you here." Mark's eyes widened in shock, and Jessica's expression shifted from surprise to suspicion. "Sarah?" he stammered, trying to mask his panic. "What are you doing here?" Jessica demanded, her voice tinged with hostility. "Oh, just running some errands," Sarah replied, forcing a smile onto her face. "I didn't realize you'd be here. I hope you're not too busy." Mark exchanged a glance with Jessica, his mind racing as he struggled to regain control. No, just a meeting," he said, his tone dismissive. "Nothing important." "Really?" Sarah pressed, stepping closer, her instincts kicking in. "You know, I heard some interesting things about this law office. Something about inheritances?" Jessica's eyes narrowed, her expression shifting to one of unease. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know how it is," Sarah said, feigning nonchalance. "People talk, especially when it comes to money." Mark shifted uncomfortably, his confidence wavering. "We should go," he said, his voice low. But Sarah wasn't ready to let them off the hook. "Why are you in such a rush? I'd love to hear more about your plans." Jake watched from his vantage point, heart pounding as he adjusted the recording device, ready to capture every moment. The tension in the air felt electric, and he knew they were on the brink of something monumental. The stakes were high, and Sarah was determined to see this through. This was her chance to turn the tables on the very people who had betrayed her. She was ready to fight for her life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery orange glow across the sky, Sarah crouched behind a weathered dumpster, her heart pounding in her chest. She and Officer Jake had carefully chosen their vantage point near a small, nondescript office building where Mark and Jessica had arranged to meet with the lawyer. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of the leaves made her flinch. Sarah clutched the old cell phone she'd found earlier, its battery holding just enough charge to record their conversation. She could feel the weight of her determination pressing down on her, fueling her resolve. "Are you ready?" Jake whispered, his voice low and steady. He adjusted his position, ensuring his own recording device was ready to capture the moment. Sarah nodded, unable to find her voice. The reality of the situation was overwhelming. Just days ago, she had been lying in a heap of garbage, believing herself to be a victim of her husband's treachery. Now, she was on the brink of exposing him and his lover. "Let's do this," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Moments later, the door swung open and Sarah's breath hitched. Mark stepped out first, his confident demeanor radiating an air of authority that made her stomach churn. Following closely behind was Jessica, her expression a mixture of excitement and anxiety. They walked towards a sleek black car parked at the curb, oblivious to the eyes watching them from the shadows. "Did you get the documents?" Jessica asked, her voice bright but laced with tension. "I can't believe we're finally doing this, Mark. This is our chance." Mark chuckled, a dark mocking sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Of course I got them. The lawyer is eager to finalize everything. With Sarah out of the picture, we can secure her inheritance without a hitch." Sarah's heart raced as she gripped the phone tighter, the realization of their callousness hitting her like a slap. She had thought Mark was merely misguided, perhaps even a little desperate, but now she understood the depths of his betrayal. He wasn't just after her money, he was willing to erase her completely, treating her life as nothing more than an obstacle in his path. "Have you thought about what happens if someone finds out?" Jessica asked, her brow furrowing slightly. I mean, there are people who care about her. What if someone sees us together? Mark scoffed, dismissing her concerns with a wave of his hand. Please, Jess, no one knows she's alive. We made sure of that. Besides, once the inheritance is ours, we can start fresh somewhere far away. No one will ever connect us to her. Sarah felt a surge of rage at Mark's callousness. He had spoken her name as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture to be discarded. The weight of his cruelty pressed heavily on her heart, but it also ignited a fire within her. She would not let him get away with this. Not now, not ever. Let's get this over with, Mark said, his voice dripping with impatience as he pulled out his phone. I'll call the lawyer and let him know we're on our way. As he spoke, Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She couldn't let this moment slip away. Channeling every ounce of strength she possessed, she pressed the record button on her phone, capturing every word they said. The sound of the device whirring to life was like a lifeline, anchoring her in this moment of truth. Mark's voice echoed in her ears. It's time to claim what's rightfully ours. Sarah won't be missed. She was always too busy with her little projects to notice what was happening around her. Jessica laughed, but it was a hollow sound, devoid of true joy. You're right. I never understood how she could be so blind to everything. But once we're out of here, everything will change. We'll be free. Free to do whatever we want, Mark added, his tone darkening, and no one will ever suspect a thing. In that moment, Sarah felt a mixture of disbelief and fury. How could he speak about her life, her existence, with such disdain? She could almost hear the echoes of their past together, the laughter, the love, the moments that now felt like distant memories. It was as if everything they had shared had been a lie, a mere facade to mask his true intentions. Suddenly, Mark's phone rang, breaking the tension in the air. He answered it, and Sarah leaned in closer, desperate to capture every detail. Yes, we're on our way, he said, his voice smooth and collected. Just finalize the paperwork, and we'll take care of the rest. As he hung up, Sarah's mind raced. She had to act. She couldn't let them leave without confronting them, without making them face the consequences of their actions. But how? The thought of revealing herself was terrifying. What if they turned on her? What if they tried to silence her for good? Are you sure about this? Jessica asked, her voice wavering slightly. What if something goes wrong? Mark placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his confidence unshakable. Nothing will go wrong. We're in control now. Just stick to the plan and we'll be fine. Sarah took a deep breath, her heart thundering in her chest. It was now or never. She stepped out from behind the dumpster, her figure illuminated by the fading light as she called out, Mark! Jessica! Both of them turned in shock, their expressions a mix of disbelief and horror. The moment hung suspended in time, the world around them fading into a blur as their eyes locked. Sarah's heart raced, but she felt a surge of empowerment wash over her. She was alive, and she was here to reclaim her life. Sarah? Mark's voice trembled, disbelief etched across his face. But we thought you were dead. Thought wrong, Sarah shot back, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. I overheard everything. You thought you could get away with this. Jessica stepped back, her face paling. This can't be happening. You're supposed to be gone. Too bad for you, Sarah snapped, her gaze flickering between the two of them. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to let you destroy my life. Mark's bravado wavered as he took a step forward, his expression darkening. You should have stayed hidden, Sarah. You're making a huge mistake. Am I? Sarah challenged, her voice rising with confidence. The only mistake here is yours. You thought you could murder me and take what's mine without facing the consequences, but here I am, and I have everything I need to expose you. Jake, who had been lurking in the shadows, stepped into view, his presence adding an unexpected layer of authority to the confrontation. And I'm here to make sure you both face those consequences, he said firmly, pulling out his badge. Mark Thompson, Jessica Reynolds, you're under investigation for conspiracy and attempted murder. The look on Mark's face was one of pure shock, while Jessica's expression twisted into panic. Sarah felt a rush of satisfaction. They were trapped in their web of lies, and she was finally in control. Let's see how you talk your way out of this one, Sarah said, her voice steady as she glanced over at Jake, who nodded in agreement. They had them right where they wanted. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the tidy lawn of Mark and Jessica's home. Sarah stood at the threshold, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. The air was thick with tension, and the world around her seemed to hold its breath. She had imagined this moment countless times, replaying it in her mind, but now that it was here, the reality of confronting her husband and his lover filled her with a mix of dread and exhilaration. Mark and Jessica were seated at the kitchen table, a stack of documents spread before them. Laughter spilled from their lips, a sound that once brought her joy but now felt like acid in her veins. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. She pushed the door open and it creaked ominously, drawing their attention. "Mark!" she called out, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "Jessica!" Their heads snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. Mark's face paled, a look of sheer shock etched across his features, while Jessica's mouth fell open in surprise. "Sarah?" Mark stammered, disbelief coloring his voice. You're alive?" "Yes," Sarah replied, stepping fully into the room, her gaze hardening as she took in the sight of her husband and his mistress. "And I know everything." Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her bravado faltering as Sarah's piercing gaze bore down on her. "You shouldn't be here," she managed, though her voice trembled slightly. "You're supposed to be..." "Dead?" Sarah interrupted, her tone laced with sarcasm. "That was the plan, wasn't it? For you both to live happily ever after with my money?" Mark shot Jessica a warning glance, his face morphing into a mask of anger. "What do you want, Sarah? You have no idea what you're interrupting," he sneered, though the bravado in his voice faltered as he took a step back. "What I want," Sarah began, her voice rising as the adrenaline surged through her veins, "is for you to admit the truth. You thought you could get away with this. You thought I was gone for good." She pulled out the old cell phone, still charged, holding it up like a trophy. "But I have everything recorded, everything." Mark's face twisted in rage. "You think that little toy can save you? You're nothing but a ghost, a pathetic woman clinging to a life that no longer exists." "Pathetic?" Sarah spat, her confidence growing with each word. "I'm standing here in front of you, alive and breathing. You're the pathetic one, Mark. Hiding behind Jessica, plotting my demise. How does it feel to know that you failed?" Before Mark could respond, the front door swung open and in walked the lawyer, Richard. His presence filled the room with an unexpected weight, a man in a tailored suit whose demeanor shifted the atmosphere entirely. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice smooth, eyes glancing between Sarah and the couple. Sarah's heart sank. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, narrowing her eyes. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I was just discussing some final details about the inheritance with Mark and Jessica. It seems you've arrived at an inconvenient time." "Final details?" Sarah scoffed, stepping closer, her resolve hardening. "You're in on this too. You were supposed to be on my side." "On your side?" Richard echoed, raising an eyebrow. "I'm on the side of the one who pays me, and that would be Mark now that you're out of the picture." He turned to Mark with a conspiratorial grin. "We just need to finalize the paperwork, and then you can have everything you've ever wanted." Sarah's anger ignited like a wildfire. "You're in on this scheme? You think you can just take my life away from me without consequences?" Richard shrugged, his nonchalance infuriating. "It's a business deal, Sarah." "Nothing personal. You were always going to be a liability." He gestured dismissively. "Now, let's not make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder?" Sarah's voice trembled with rage. "You think this is hard? You haven't seen anything yet." She glanced at the phone in her hand, her mind racing. This was her moment, and she couldn't let it slip away. "Mark, Jessica, Richard," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling within her. "I recorded everything you said about your plans, the accident, the inheritance, everything. You've all conspired against me, and I have the proof." Mark's face darkened, panic flickering in his eyes. "You wouldn't dare—" "Oh, but I will," Sarah interrupted, her heart racing as she pressed the record button on the phone. "And this isn't just about revenge, this is about justice." She turned to Richard, her expression fierce. "You think you can walk away from this unscathed? You're part of this conspiracy, and you will pay for it." Richard's bravado faltered, and he took a step back. "This is ridiculous, Sarah. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You think you can just waltz in here and ruin everything?" "I'm not ruining anything," Sarah replied, her voice unwavering. "You all made your choices. Now it's time to face the consequences." The tension snapped like a taut string. Mark lunged toward Sarah, but she was ready. "Don't come any closer," she shouted, raising the phone as if it were a weapon. "I'll send this recording to the police right now. You'll all be arrested for conspiracy to commit murder." Stop it, Sarah, Mark bellowed, his face contorted with rage. You're making a huge mistake. No, Mark, she replied, her voice cold. The mistake was thinking I wouldn't fight back. You underestimated me. You thought you could bury me and take my life, but here I am, standing tall. In that moment, the realization hit Sarah with a rush of exhilaration. She had been the victim, but now she was the one holding the power. The faces of Mark and Jessica twisted into masks of fear and desperation, and for the first time, Sarah felt the weight of her strength. Let's call the police, shall we? She said, her voice steady, and she started to dial. But before she could hit send, Richard lunged forward, desperation etched across his face. Wait, he yelled, his voice rising. We can work this out. You don't have to do this. Sarah paused, her finger hovering over the button. Work it out. How do you plan to do that? By silencing me again? The door burst open, and Officer Jake Daniels stepped inside, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as he took in the scene. What's going on here? He demanded, his eyes darting from Sarah to the trio. Jake, Sarah exclaimed, relief washing over her. I have everything recorded. They planned my death and were about to take my inheritance. They need to be arrested. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Sarah cut him off. It's all on this phone. You need to hear it. Jake stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. Let me see that phone, Sarah. With trembling hands, she handed it over, watching as he scrolled through the recordings. The tension in the room thickened as the implications of her words sank in. After a few moments, Jake looked up, his expression serious. This is enough to take them in, he said, glancing at Mark and Jessica. You're both under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder. As the weight of those words settled over the room, Mark's bravado crumbled. You can't do this. I didn't mean it. It was all her fault, he shouted, pointing at Jessica, who had gone pale. But Sarah stood tall, her heart pounding with triumph. No more lies, Mark. The truth is finally out. With Jake calling for backup, the atmosphere shifted from one of tension to one of resolution. Sarah felt a sense of liberation wash over her as she watched Mark and Jessica being handcuffed, their faces contorted with fear and disbelief. Richard, too, was caught in the web of his own making, and as he was led away, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This is just the beginning, she whispered to herself, her heart racing with newfound strength. She had reclaimed her power, and with it, she would rebuild her life. As she walked out of the house, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the landscape. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah felt free. The weight of betrayal had lifted, and she was ready to rise from the ashes of her past, ready to embrace the future with open arms.